What happened when Jack left for?
Well, when Jack left, my life kept being very busy. And I had made a very good friend in Colorado with the wife of one of the other language officers. And we both rented an extraordinary apartment. And we got it from an ad in the naval officers. There was a building to which naval officers and wives could go for posted rentals and other information like that. And this apartment was on 22nd Street and Lexington Avenue, and it was a very big apartment building. And I'm trying to remember, I think that my friend got the bedroom and I got the living room. And my father had made some furniture which we had there. It was elegant, and I can't remember whether Solitarov's group was still in New York City, and I went back to them and I found a job. Jack's letters came in bunches from wherever he was, and they were often 10 pages long. And the life that he was leading, he was in Hawaii, and he was with many of the people he had gone to school with, and he was just full of all kinds of news, but mostly they were love letters with our own private vocabulary. And if you're interested, people, he saved every single letter.
Did you write to one another every day?
Yes, we wrote to each other every day. I did not write 10 pages at a time. I was too busy, but I did write to him every day. So all those letters are in my present bedroom on a shelf. There's a whole shelf full of letters. And do you know what my brilliant husband did when he had retired? He took them all out of the envelopes and threw away the envelopes.
Why did you do that?
You'll have to ask him.
All those beautiful stamps.
All those envelopes he threw away because, excuse me, because he was interested in the correspondence. Jack had a way of focusing, you know that. So, if you want to be embarrassed about your heritage, I give you permission to read all those letters. Now, the University of Colorado gets in touch with me about every other week because they have a grant where they have collected all the correspondence and everything, and they have asked me many times, wouldn't I send the correspondence? And I said to them I would first have to go through the correspondence. In the meantime, nephew Alan said, don't give anything away until I read it. Well, have any of you ever tried to read 10 pages at a time over several years?
Of our dad's writing?
And yes, and being Dad, his writing was all downhill. You can interpret that whichever way you want. And he had such bad handwriting.
And tiny.
Tiny, bad handwriting all downhill. And some of the things that he said were very uphill. As a matter of fact, it was like the joke you told me the other day. You all heard that joke?
Yes.
So I don't have to repeat it. Present company will still be alive to tell you. I got a job. I can't remember what job it was. I can't remember what job it was.
Were you working for lawyers or were you working for a Jewish agency?
I can't remember at the moment. Well, maybe a half year from now it'll come to me. But I did have a job. I was still with the group. And I
Let me
think,
ask you a question. If I
ask
can
me many
interrupt you.
questions, I'll have.
I'm curious because of the kind of person you are, which is so, you're such an independent thinker. And you grew up in an age of such an incredible I mean, you came of age in such a time of incredible conformity. And I'm curious to know how you thought about marriage and your place as a woman in the work world, in the world in your marriage. How you thought about those things, given
That's a
that,
whole other script, I'll tell you.
Yes, well, I'm interested in that.
As I think I told you before, I was never going to marry.
Right.
What woman, independent thinker, would marry a mere man at that time, where I would be the cook, the housekeeper, the caretaker, and have children? How could I reconcile all that and be the artist I knew already I was and had already gotten a lot of recognition? Because in Colorado, I had an extraordinary exhibit, which was one of the highlights of the whole year, to which everybody came. And some of you have seen the work at that time. A lot of it was very political. So I have been involved in political thinking and philosophical thinking and all that. And I didn't intend to marry Jack when we first met, even though he was a great kisser, you know, and that was the thing that counted the most to me when I first looked at him, those beautiful lips. And I said to myself, that's a good kisser. And I went up and said, "What's your name?" And he was startled. "Jack, and what's yours?" "Millie." And he looks at me and I look at him. And then he said, "Are you going to the dance tonight?" Because that night this is a repetition.
That's all right. But I wondered now how you thought about, did you think about doing things very differently than your own parents had done it?
Oh my God. My own parents were only my parents.
Mm-hmm.
My own parents came from a different culture. They were religious. My father was much more like me in terms of temperament. And I understand from a recent talk with David that the reason I have liked men all of my life more than women is because I was attached to my father, who took me every place. Well, while my mother was still trying to cope even before she died, how did I give birth to this absolute slob? Because you could eat off her floors. And the first thing that she did when she came to the house was sweep, and didn't understand how I would let a driveway look the way my driveway looked, with all the scattering of stuff. So my mother and I really didn't understand each other one whit. I understood my mother better at the end, but I don't think she ever understood me. But she did realize for the many years that I had to take care of her.
So, Mom, the years you and Dad were separated for like 3.5 years during the war?
How many years? I don't think that long. But anyway, we were separated, and he had experiences that he had not counted on. As an interpreter and translator, he never thought that he would end up on some of the boats, the destroyers, and Pacific waves, and never thought that he would end up in Iwo Jima in a foxhole, and never thought, you know, that he would be attached to the Marines.
Yeah.
And so, and never thought that he would have a gun. And I even have a wonderful photo of him with a gun, Jack with a gun. I think that what kept Jack on even keel, and that's a good analogy, even during all the tempests and everything, was his correspondence with me. Because every day, no matter where, he wrote very long letters and transported him to me. And always in the private language, we had sex with all different kinds of names and positions. I like the fact that you're smiling. Yes, yes, but you know, we were young then. But that continued to the very end, very end. Jack was very sensual, as you all know, having touched his sculptures. Have you? Have you closed your eyes and touched the sculptures? Well,
Really?
I was his
Really?
sculpture! Where do you think he learned all that? He never met a woman like me, even though he had been taught by an experienced woman, because when we first met, Jack was a virgin. Would you believe this?
I love your nonlinear storytelling.
And so was I. So we couldn't have taught each other a single thing. All we could have done was explore our way, and God knows what would have happened. In any event.
So, but Mom, the
Yes.
years that you were, no, this is fine. The years that you were apart, getting back to Jill's question, how did that affect your thinking about yourself as a married woman?
Yes, yes. Well, Jack learned at the very beginning he could not expect from me anything that any respectable man could expect from a woman he had married, like washing his socks.
Right.
You know, I told you that story.
Yep.
So I said I'd wash his if he'd wash mine, and his mother caught him washing his socks. She almost died. Her son, you know, she would stand over his shoulder while he ate. You want another little bite? You know. So.
So how did you think of yourself? You were back in New York. You were a married single woman.
I thought of myself that I have to get on with my work.
Uh-huh.
My work being art, and my own political thinking, because I didn't like anything that was going on anywhere. And I felt that there had been a lot of denial that had gotten us into the war at the time we got into the war, you know, with all the background of the war. And as you see in some of the work that you have seen of mine, that I had I have always identified myself first as an artist. And as I've told you many times, the role model I had for being an artist was Rembrandt. And my real dream was that I would be the first woman Rembrandt, because there were no women artists that I could really identify with. So I was a very sexy woman in some respect, but I never thought of my sex. I always thought of myself as an independent being who was born to create. To create what? I knew from the very beginning that it would change as my experience changed, as where I lived changed, you know, as how I felt changed. And I always knew, always, that it was one big rap, and that I would never find a formula, never ever, and I still haven't, that would be able to express what you're searching for now, which is the process of living. It's really a process. And you go through many halls, many holes, many holy places, many holistic places. Are there any other?
Just do your riff, honey. Just do the riff on the word whole.
So Mom,
yes, that's good.
So
Ask
when
me a
did you
question.
find out, how much before Dad came home did you find out he was coming home, and then what did you think?
Well, I knew when he finally had enough points, because after a while, after a certain number of years, you were able to detach yourself when the war was over. By that time, he had been helping in translation negotiate the peace treaties of the Bonin Islands. As a matter of fact, I have a ceremonial sword at home that was given to him. You've seen that. I have other evidence that he really did use his training as a translator. And you know Jack, he always had a certain presence that people respected him. And so he had an assistant who was a Nisei, Japanese speaking, who would translate for him when he had any difficulty, because even with 150 words a day in 3 different alphabets, 150, men broke down during that program, broke down. They couldn't take it, you know. And they got up 6 in the morning and would come home 6 at night, and then would have to do homework until sometimes midnight, and also train. You know, it was...
Did his assistant travel with him throughout the war, or was that just...
I don't know whether
in
he had one assistant or many. I can't recall at the moment. If we dig a little further, it will probably surface in some non sequitur. I really don't know. However, he had to go to Japan to get his release. So he finally got to Japan. And when he got off the plane, he said, at long last, I'll be able to use my Japanese in this culture and understand in a way that other people will not. And so the first person who approached him, he was ready with his Japanese. And they're laughing because they already know what happened. A man came over to him and said, I am a pimp. Can I introduce you to a prostitute? That was the first words. However, that did not deter him, because he always loved art. He always went to museums. But the years we were married, he got to understand art in a way that most people never do, because of Solitarov and his group, and because of my own constant evolution. And so he was very well prepared to appreciate the couple of weeks that he had in Japan, and he did go traveling on his own. And as all of you have seen, who have been in the house, he collected some things that were amazing. I have things there that are museum pieces on the shelf, the Buddhas, the guardians, the temple guardians, even though broken, you know, and many of the things he came back with, including the sculpture, a contemporary sculpture of that time, which has now aged, which was just fresh wood. You know, the man with the, do you know the sculpture I'm talking about? Would you describe it, Sharon? It's hard for you to remember. Well, it's on that shelf. This is the wonderful thing about the life that Jack and I had together. He was a pack rat. You know I'm a pack rat. What?
I'm sorry, nothing.
And so the house is packed to the square inch, to the square quarter of an inch, and people are still bringing us things. I have no place to put them. Please, 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 don't bring me things. Just bring me you, you know. So that he came back also with prints that we have upstairs that are Hokusai and Hiroshige. We have a print of the 40 Ronin warriors. How many films have been made about that episode of Japan, of the, you know. In present day films, they are still having American films based on that, you know, of the warriors, the independent warriors.
So where did you live when he came back? Where did you move to?
He came, well, that's another story. By the time he came back, I can't remember her name, the woman who I was sharing the apartment with had to leave because her parents were separating. She was Canadian, and she was going to save her parents' marriage. She was very distraught that after all those years they were separating and divorcing. And so I had made a friend in Colorado, one of the students, Tina Jones, of whom I made a portrait. Next time you're at the house, maybe I'll find it. It's one of my old master portraits of Tina Jones. And I had met her at an orchestra's recital in Colorado, and she had the head of a dancer, the longest neck, and beautiful. And she was known to Joe Cohen, the professor who really implemented my life in Colorado. So I got in touch with her. She was in Cambridge, and asked her, wouldn't she like to come to New York and share the apartment with me? Well, she couldn't, but she had two friends from Colorado who would be very happy to. Oy vey is mia, those two friends. They were the typical college kids of that time. If they put on a piece of underwear, yesterday's underwear was already on the floor. There were piles of dirty clothing that never went into the washing.
How long did you live with them?
I lived with them until I couldn't stand it anymore, and I traded that apartment. And they were trying to trade the apartment. I had the lease. They were trying to trade the apartment for an apartment where they get rid of me, because I was then still with the group, and I would come home sometimes at midnight, and I would knock on the door because they knew the hell they had to get out of my room, which was the living room, and take away the cigarettes. And, you know, there would always be a scurry.
Right, but when did Dad come home and all this?
Honey, do we have to be so chronological?
I can't, I'm sorry, this may go on
No,
forever.
that's fine.
Well,
That's why
what
I was trying to get to
all right,
Dad.
but I have to first, I
Mm-hmm.
have to get back in my mind when Jack came back. And so, I traded that apartment for, oh, that's another story. But anyway, I moved out of that apartment into an apartment that I could sustain by myself. When Jack came back, he came to that apartment.
And what did he do when he came back?
Jack was on kind of leave from the agency that he had been working for. Now, I don't remember, memories get buried, like when you people these days, you put down something, I just had it, where is it?
Sure.
So I have to extrapolate, and it may come up later. What job did he get? But he got a job at, eventually, at one of the child care agencies.
This was before social work school? Or
No,
he'd gone to social work school before the war?
Yeah, he had a degree,
Uh-huh.
and he had a job.
When did he work for the Department of Welfare?
That was before he got his degree, because he couldn't afford to go back to school. It's when we married that I was able to finance his further education.
So he didn't do anything with the GI Bill when he got back then?
Yes, we got, with the GI Bill, we got a mortgage for the house eventually.
I see.
Yeah. No, he did benefit from the GI Bill in that respect. But
And he came back when? 46?
I don't remember the date right now.
Okay.
I can't carry all of those
That's fine.
things.
Well, we didn't know, but
Yeah.
We
we
can
expect
find
you to it.
the discharge papers.
Yeah, I have, if I thought you were going to be doing this, I would have brought his discharge papers to refer to. You must, Sharon, the next time that you have time, I have to show you where his discharge
You've
papers
shown
are.
them to me before.
You know where they are? I showed it to you, but I
They're
have to
in
show.
that one?
Yeah, I have to show you where all the pertinent information is. I feel very temporary, always. That's my problem.
You have for 85 years.
Well, that's why I've squeezed in so much. When you think that you don't have much time, you want to take advantage of every second. You
I
know how that
understand
feels.
completely.
You know. And I have.
Yes, you have.
I
You
have.
continue to.
I continue to. Look at what I'm looking at, these beautiful people who are listening to me without thinking, when is she going to stop talking, blah, 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 blah.
Well, we do have 4 more hours of tape, so keep going.
Oh, God, okay, ask me questions, if I can remember them.
So let's move on.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, so we were kind of trying to figure out when Dad came back from the service what he was doing at the time.
Well, at the time, I remember that he would have been able to go back to his old job. But whether he did or not, I don't remember at the moment.
So Millie,
But he moved into the apartment that I had found through all kinds of shenanigans and negotiations, where David was born.
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is so how did the two of you decide you were ready to have a child?
Yes.
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 And so tell us about how that sort of period was for you getting
Well,
pregnant
of course,
and carrying David.
Well,
On the hottest day of the year.
that's when
That's
David
birthing
was
David,
born.
but-
Had every pregnancy ended with a child, I would have had 5 children.
5 children. I
Right.
did not know that.
Yes, I had 2 spontaneous abortions. I had always menstruated irregularly, and so that we did practice primitive birth control. I mean, I did have a pessary. That's not so primitive for that time. Jack never used a condom. And that's a funny story about the pessary, but I'm not going to tell you.
Also
Why
known
not?
as a diaphragm.
Diaphragm, it was called a pessary. But I had a married friend couple from the group with whom Jack and I were very friendly, and they would every once in a while lend us their apartment before we were married for some serious petting. That was nice. That was nice of them.
So you decided you were ready to have a baby.
Well, yes, I was working. I was working for lawyers. Yes, I was working for a very prestigious firm with a lawyer who adored me. Men always adored me. I emanate certain sexuality, and still do. Men still flirt with me.
I'll have you know it's
I
an
know it's hard to-
inherited trait.
Yes, we emanate glory.
Ooh, that's a nice way of putting it.
It is, it's glory. It's appreciation of the life force. Yeah. So, where were we?
You never thought you were going to marry.
Yes.
Did you think? What did
Well-
you think about having children?
Well, when Jack came back from the war, after all, when I gave birth to David, I was 27. And at that time, 27 was a mature age, not like today when
Right.
women wait till they're 40.
Right.
You didn't have children. Even though I could have had children until I was 56, I didn't have menopause till 56. How's that for the life force? What you're learning about me now is terrible.
Terrible.
I'm
Terrible.
embarrassing my son, and
Oh.
he's psychoanalyzing me right there.
Without training.
So did you think?
So when I was working for, we thought that, yes, we wanted to have a family. And having found that marriage did not deter me from being an artist, I never thought that anything would deter me from being an artist, and nothing ever did. Nothing ever did. when I think of how I squeezed in, and you see all the variety of things I've done over the years. I squeezed it in, or I made it paramount. And sometimes when you are not able to fulfill that original germination of an idea, like the roses in my garden now, when it goes underground, the ideas interseminate and come up in a different form. And so I've learned to be patient even with that when I can't always do everything. It's harder now. Go ahead, you want to ask me a
How
question?
old was David when you moved to Europe? Then a year and a half?
And how did that get decided?
What, darling?
How did that get decided?
Well,
Wait a minute, we haven't had birth with you yet. I want to go back to that. And
well,
work
yes.
our way up to
So I learned that, well, I always knew that I had hormonal problems. And at that time, I had had a neighbor on 93rd Street who was a gynecologist, an obstetrician, you know, and he was very helpful, but it meant a lot of testing and so forth. And like with everything else and other people I know, I don't test well. I test well on intelligence tests, but when it comes to even right now, I'm a dilemma to many of my loving doctors. They really want me to last and last well, but what I have learned from that experience is that there is no formula that can diagnose any single person perfectly, and we have all found that to be true. So that we wanted to have children. And so we stopped using birth control. And when I was pregnant, I was looking forward to it. My loving employer was feeling sorry that I would have to leave because it was assumed at that time that when you had children you didn't work anymore. And then I had a spontaneous abortion, and that was a crisis for me, because the minute I knew I was pregnant, I wasn't even at the point where you would feel the fetus. I already started thinking about mothering, and how I was going to be a different kind of mother, and how was I going to do everything. And oh, beautiful bird. Sorry. So I went on working, and I kept being involved in the group, and even Jack became involved in the group to a degree, because he had, you know, his own passage. The second time, I'm trying to remember whether I had 2 spontaneous abortions before David or one and one after David. No, after David I had a birth. So that was kind of discouraging, and I was going to doctors, and as a matter of fact, I don't remember now the sequence, but I was being examined and fiddled around with gynecologically and everything of what was wrong, and nobody could figure really out what was wrong. And at a time when I was pregnant, I think that's why I had the second spontaneous abortion. And then I became pregnant, and it was David. And even before he was David, when he was just semen and what's the other thing?
There's an egg somewhere in there.
I was going to say ovum. Okay, I was going to say ovum, not egg. Uh, there was already that stubbornness. He was not going to let anything get in his way of being born. No, goddammit. The same David today. Nothing deters him. If he likes a clean house and you leave a crumb, it'll be gone the next minute. You put a glass there. It's not like my house. No, that's not true. I don't like dishes in the sink or unmade beds. And so,
But crumbs are okay.
so the obstetrician, we were living at 93rd Street at this apartment that we had gotten, which was one large room, a foyer, and a stand-up kitchen where you couldn't eat. You could eat in the foyer. You know.
Also known as a studio apartment.
That was my studio. The foyer was the studio, you know. And my father had made more furniture, and it was a beautiful, beautiful place with paintings on the wall, original Adlers, you know. And I had a very good pregnancy. I was nauseous for a while, but I was so happy to be pregnant with this irresistible force inside of me who started to dance and respond to all the music he heard from the very beginning. I knew that what in there was already alive and preparing for the entrance, a grand entrance. Was it a grand entrance? My God, I'll never forget that. It didn't take me very long. And it was the hottest day in August. And when I went in, they said, well, on a day like this, there's nothing else you can do. You might as well have a baby. And I did. And when that baby looked into my eyes, I knew that he already understood me, because those eyes were not there. They were already analytic and looking right back at me, those dark eyes. The only thing I couldn't understand was, why did I give birth to this Chinese baby? Because, as you know from the first photographs, he looked absolutely Chinese. But because I was the only woman at the hospital nursing, it was not popular to nurse at that time, because all the doctors said, put them on a schedule, you know.
I think one of your ancestors was probably raped by a Mongol invader.
Oh, undoubtedly.
That would explain the eyes and the Mongol
Undoubtedly, yes.
You know what? It isn't the Mongolian spot. The dermatologist told me.
Yes,
Is it?
before you tell us your story, let me tell you what
first.
let me tell me what I heard. Because I was the only woman nursing, they dropped the baby in my bed instead of the nursery. And because at the beginning when you nurse, it isn't regular, I was nursing him all the time. As a matter of fact, until he was 3 months old and started teething and biting my nipples. Does he still?
You don't have to answer that.
You don't have to answer that, David. But in the hospital, all the nurses and interns would gather while I nursed, because they never saw anybody nursing.
It's so bizarre.
Such a shame.
So the first thing I did when they put him in my bed was unwrap him to see if he had 5 fingers in each hand and 5 toes on each foot. And I see in the back this big black and blue mark the size of my fist. And I had had an easy birth. So I called the pediatrician and I said to him, I had an easy birth, no forceps or anything. Why is there this mark? He says, that's called a Mongolian spot. That's what it's called. He didn't explain to me how I would have gotten it. He said, and it'll disappear by 6 months. I learn now from my son, the doc, that it's an entirely different thing, but it doesn't matter. I had the impression that indeed, because that's the first thing that occurred to me, that my folks, my mother being from Latvia, which is where the Mongolian hordes had descended, that some ancestor had intermingled, and that certainly that was an intelligent definition for what I saw in my arms, you know. And in the early photographs, even when we went to Europe, the first photograph, you look Oriental.
So what
As
is
do
this?
you, Sarah, Sharon. You absolutely were the first blue-eyed child that I ever gave birth to who was from Oriental heritage. I'm fascinated by all these stories, you know, because it absolutely fits in with my own definition of life, as you all know I have it, that we're all connected if we don't even know how and how far back. We are all connected, and our energies are all exuded, not only from here and from here, but that we are countries with different planets, different worlds intermingling in our bodies. What we're learning now, I'm so happy for no other reason to have lived this long, to understand a little bit better the phenomenon that we are, and to appreciate that phenomenon. And that also is what's helping me to linger on, because what's ahead that I will then see how ignorant I was then, but ignorance is important. It sets you sometimes on wrong paths, destructive ones, but you learn a lot from ignorance, just as you do from true knowledge, and you're waving your head. And I realize now that for 85 years I've been ignorant about very important things that are being explained to me now. So David was born, and I had, oh yes, I worked.
What kind of,
Just a
baby?
moment, I just remembered, very important. I had made a friend through my friend Tamara, and, excuse me, I gotta wipe my nose. I got it. I knew I had some. Excuse me, camera.
You're excused.
Yes, one part that happens with age is you got a drippy nose and a drippy pee all the time, and nose all the time. I don't care. Everybody knows it, and even Sharon tells me, "Here's a Kleenex." Hello, dimple face. Yes, through my very good friends who I've never mentioned up till now, Tamara Ballard and Andre Ballard, two absolutely remarkable women. That's a whole other movie I won't get into. A whole other couple, unlike. I became acquainted with one of her distant relatives, and we became friends, and she was working for B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundations. And I was always interested, because I am an atheist, a declared atheist. I was always interested in why I'm an atheist, so I had to learn something about my own religion and all the other religions, and to see where I fit in, and I don't fit in anywhere, unfortunately. But I'm used to not fitting in. It didn't disturb me. So I thought I would learn something about Jews, because the Hillel Foundations was an organization which sent rabbis into the colleges all over the country to form a Hillel unit where Jewish kids could come and where they could celebrate holidays as Jews, because Jews have not been the most popular entity ever in America, in China, anywhere in the world. And one reason the Jews are so well traveled and so well connected, and people think therefore is a conspiracy, because every place that they were always moved out of, if not indeed killed. And so they're the most well-traveled unit in the United States of America and everywhere else, talking about bad experiences having good results. The other thing about Jews is that the men, at least, were literate, because one of the first languages, written languages, based also partially on other languages where they had, was Hebrew. And every Jewish boy learned Hebrew, which made them literate not only in the Bible, but they were able to communicate with each other cross country and cross, continent. It's a wonderful history when you think how prejudice, how bad experiences can lead to such marvelous results, And so, at Hillel Foundations, I met Abram Sacker, who started Brandeis University and who had written a history of the Jews, and who is very well known in many fields. And he really appreciated me because they could see right away I was an artist. I brought in work, and as a matter of fact, to jump a bit forward, when David was born, I got a beautiful letter from Sacker with his joy, because he knew how much this child was, and I worked until I was, I think, the 9th month pregnant. And one of the rabbis that I met was Judah Shapiro. And Judah fell in love with me. I don't blame him. If you knew his wife, you'd understand why. But also he fell in love with me. And he didn't have much money, and we didn't have much money. And we decided that we would, during summer vacation, share a cottage together. And that cottage was on a lake in Croton. And we were supposed to share cooking and all that. And I forget Judah's wife's name. She couldn't cook a stitch. And they had 2 boys, lovely, lovely boys, but no mothering, good fathering. She was a disturbed woman. Now, in retrospect, she did what she could, but she couldn't do much. And she was very, not egotistic. What is it when you're self-obsessed?
Narcissistic?
Narcissistic. That's the word, narcissus. Why they name a flower after that kind of. Because the image in the water. That's why.
Right.
Because the narcissus loved its image. Yes.
Can I?
So, as a result of this experience, and I have wonderful pictures of Jack, as a result of this experience, Judah went off to, he worked for the Joint Distribution Committee, and he went off to Europe to start some kind of education program there. And we were in correspondence. Judah wrote to me and I wrote to him. And he said, you should come to Europe while there's still a Europe. And so I don't know who made the decision, but it had to be both of us eventually. Usually all decisions of moment like that, I would snap at it, and then I would have to convince Jack, because Jack was very loath, without thinking back and forth, should I, he really found it hard to give up a situation known to him for an unknown situation. And you know that about Jack, so I'm not exaggerating. So that it's good that there be one person in a marriage who jumps at anything, and the other person who holds that one back a bit. Because then, you don't jump into the well. So Jack was born in Poland, as you know, and the Joint Distribution Committee at that time was financing the search in Poland for children who had been hidden by Christians during the war, because they were trying to also see if any of the people out of the concentration camps were searching for children that they had left behind. That was a very, very interesting experience for Jack and me, that whole search. And anybody who denies the Holocaust should come to me before I die, because I saw the numbers and I knew the people and even entertained many of them because of the position that Jack eventually took. So we were supposed to leave for Poland before we went to Europe. Well before. You were still in, not just a year and a half old, you were much younger. And we were ready to leave because why not? I could take care of him anywhere, and I did. So that at that point, in Czechoslovakia, there were two brothers, the Fields brothers. This is really an interesting part of world history, who were imprisoned as American spies, which they were not, but they were Jews, and Europe at that time, post-war, was a very difficult period. This is all news to you that you're hearing, right, Roger? So Jack's and our visas were canceled because they felt that Jack, as a Pole, would go to Europe this time, and he'd be imprisoned or killed, a Jew, And so instead, we went to France, where he became assistant to the director of social work for the whole agency. And we went to France, and because Jack, before we went to Europe, went into psychoanalysis. And at that time, his psychoanalyst was of the stripe that you couldn't tell your wife what the therapy was about. That was between the therapist and the patient. And I felt cheated. I thought I would learn something. However, the therapist, Siegfried Peine, can you imagine? I'm just...
Good for you.
Oh, God, what comes on earth? Had a relative in Paris. And the relative, I don't know whether it was the relative or the relative's husband, was a lawyer. And so he wanted us to contact this lawyer when we got to Paris, and which I did. And the lawyer helped us to find the most elegant apartment in the equivalent of Fifth Avenue, most elegant apartment. Now at that time it was post-war in Paris, and you had to have cards for rationing. Milk was rationed, meat was rationed, everything was rationed. There was a terrible black market, and because David was so young, I was able to get milk rationed and all that.
This is right at the end of 48, beginning of 49, right? Yeah. I was 13 months or so.
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
It'll come to me another time. But because of the agency, we were able to get products that other people couldn't, because they had their own store for the people they employed, and they felt that the people they employed should live a better life than the other people. However, there was also a law that, because there was no housing, that if you had an apartment or a house which was bigger than needed by you or your family, and in this case it was a single woman, that you had to put it up for rent. And so we got this elegant apartment.
This is in Clamart?
No, this is in Paris, in the very, I'm not remembering right now the address, but even that'll come to me.
It was Right Bank?
What?
Right Bank?
Oh, it was like the equivalent of Fifth Avenue.
Hmm.
So the apartment was astounding. I had never been in an apartment like this outside of the museums. And being the apartment of what was once a rich woman who was living there with us, that was, she could live there. And she had also a summer, not only a summer dwelling, but like yours, we go on weekends and holidays. Fortunately, she wasn't with us all the time, and that's another story. But the apartment had a bedroom, a salon, which is like a living room, a salon à fumier, that means a room to smoke in. It had an upstairs on the top floor. What is it, David?
We have about 4 or 5 minutes on this tape, and then I just have to change the tape. You're doing great, Mom. It's wonderful.
Really? You want me to go on?
Absolutely.
Okay. On the top floor of this building, there were rooms for the servants. And Jacques had a salary, but also he had a per diem, which was more money than we had ever had, ever. And because the dollar was worth so many francs, $1 was worth 5,000 francs. Right, a dollar had money, was meaningful. So that because of that, we were able to afford this apartment, which I think was like 10,000 francs. I mean, it was really unbelievable, an unbelievable luxury. However, the unbelievable luxury meant that David, who was not toilet trained and had copious peeing and other events, I was afraid to let him sit on those golden chairs in the living room. Poor boy, poor boy. And this was to the disgust of the woman who became my bonne à tout faire, that means the servant who does everything, who had been an upper middle class woman herself. She was shocked and horrified by the way I was bringing up this child, not yet toilet trained, shocked and horrified. And
Bonne à tout faire?
a bonne
A bun.
à tout faire, not good.
One is a maid.
Yeah. So the bonne à tout faire was a splendid cook. The lawyer who had gotten me this was invited over. She was just so ravished that we had a friend of this importance, that when he was coming, we would have 10-course meals with a different wine with each meal, an aperitif before, and then some kind of, what do you call the after drink?
Liqueur.
Liqueur. And she would tell me she would go shopping because even though I knew French.
We're going to stop for a sec.